After the Pontiac Firebird, Trans Am SD 455. Opening a car that shouldn't have existed. Picture this, a dusty road somewhere in America, maybe Kentucky or Ohio, the sun hanging low and bleeding orange across the horizon. A 1973 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am sits idling, engine off, but the asphalt beneath it still remembers what just happened. The hood rises and falls with each breath from underneath, a massive functional scoop that looks like the car is gasping for air. The paint is Brewster green, with that iconic screaming chicken stretched across the hood, wings spread wide, defiant, almost mocking the laws of physics and the laws of men. Turn that key. Listen. The starter motor engages, and for a moment, nothing. Then, a thunderous awakening, a deep primal rumble that seems to come from somewhere before time, from an era when American cars were built to be felt, not just driven. 8 cylinders, each one hand-assembled by Pontiac engineers who understood that they were building something that wasn't supposed to exist. The shaker hood vibrates. The whole car trembles with barely contained power, like a caged animal that's been waiting 50 years to run free again. This is the Super Duty 455. This is the last roar of the muscle car era. This is a machine born in defiance. The birth of the Firebird and Pontiac's rebellion. To understand the SD 455, you have to go back to the late 1960s, to a moment when Pontiac looked at Ford's Mustang and saw what the future could be. The Firebird arrived in 1967 as Pontiac's answer to the pony car revolution, sleek, low-slung, hungry. It was the beginning of something that would reshape American automotive culture. But Pontiac wasn't just chasing trends. Under the leadership of engineers who believed that cars should have souls, Pontiac was building a performance philosophy, a culture of rebellion wrapped in sheet metal and chrome. There was a man named John DeLorean leading that charge. Brilliant, ambitious, willing to fight the corporate bureaucracy to prove that performance and innovation didn't have to die just because the world was changing. By the early 1970s, the Trans Am package arrived, and it was pure aggression. The screaming chicken, the shaker hood, function and attitude fused into one machine. But this was a time of change. The early 1970s brought rising insurance rates that made insurance companies look at performance cars like they were asking people to sign suicide pacts. The Clean Air Act was tightening, emissions regulations were strangling horsepower across the industry, and whispers of a fuel crisis were starting to become reality. Corporate boardrooms everywhere were quietly killing their performance programs, burying the engines that had defined the American dream in a coffin of pragmatism and liability. Insurance companies were pricing performance cars into oblivion. GM Corporate was looking at the future and seeing regulations, lawsuits, and bankruptcy if they didn't conform. The muscle car era was dying. Everyone could feel it. The golden age was ending, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Except Pontiac decided to do it anyway. Why the SD 455 was a miracle. In 1973, Pontiac engineers made a decision that would become legend. They would build one last uncompromising performance engine. They would hand-assemble it. They would reinforce the block with special casting. They would forge the rods and pistons from materials meant for racing. They would machine special high-flow round-port cylinder heads that breathed like nothing else on the road. They would tune a performance camshaft that would make the engine scream when it wanted to scream and rumble when it wanted to rumble. This wasn't just an upgraded 455. This was practically a racing engine born in defiance of an era that said racing was dead. The Super Duty 455. Now, the official numbers said 290 horsepower. Everyone who knew anything about cars understood that was a polite fiction, a number designed to appease insurance companies and EPA regulators who were just starting to count horses. The real output? Closer to 350 horsepower, maybe more. But the real story wasn't the horsepower, it was the torque, over 500 pound-feet of it, massive, overwhelming torque that would plant your back against the seat and make your neck whip backward like you'd been hit by something. Paired with a heavy-duty TH400 transmission, the kind of transmission built to handle real power, not the compromised automatics most muscle cars were getting, and a 3.42 positive traction rear end. The SD455 was a complete system built with one purpose: to move a car down the road faster than should have been legally possible. The engine came in a unique presentation, the functional shaker hood with SD455 callouts, because Pontiac engineers believed you should know what was underneath. You should see it. You should feel it. You should know that you were driving something special, something that was built with intention and pride in an era when pride in American engineering was becoming a luxury good. And here's the thing that makes this miracle even more miraculous. It barely happened. GM Corporate initially tried to kill the SD455 program. They looked at the regulations, the liability, the insurance premiums, and they said no. Too risky, too expensive, too much of a liability in a changing world. But Pontiac engineers, men who had grown up believing that cars were supposed to be exciting, fought for it. They argued, cajoled, and convinced management that this wasn't just a car, it was a statement, a final stand, a monument to the belief that performance and engineering could matter, even in a world that was trying to kill both. They won. The SD455 made it into production. Design and identity when cars were sculpture. The Trans Am itself was a sculpture of attitude, that long hood stretched out like a predator preparing to strike. The fenders flared wide, ready for the muscle that lived underneath. The front end had air extractors that weren't just there to look menacing, they actually worked, channeling cooling air to the brakes and engine bay. Functional fender vents along the side reminded you that heat was a constant companion when you were moving this much power and this much metal down the highway. And then there was the hood, the screaming chicken, an eagle with wings spread wide, painted in contrasting colors, saying everything that needed to be said about what this car represented: freedom, power, the refusal to go quietly into the night as the world changed around you. The colors themselves were pure 1970s America. Brewster green, a deep, sophisticated green that looked like money and muscle combined. Buccaneer red, which was less about sophistication and more about pure aggression. Cameo white, which looked clean until you understood that beneath that white paint was an engine that would turn that cleanliness into smoke and heat in a single heartbeat. Inside, the interior was pure Pontiac engineering wrapped in 1970s sensibility. The dashboard was engine-turned, giving it a texture that caught light and shadow like ripples on water. The gauges sat deep in the dash, set back where they belonged, visible to the driver but not dominating the view. Form F bucket seats held you like they understood exactly what kind of driving you were about to do. The steering wheel was thick, honest, made of real material that told you something true about the connection between man and machine. By 1974, steel bumper regulations arrived, and Pontiac updated the front-end styling to accommodate the new federal mandates. The Trans Am evolved slightly, got a bit heavier, but lost none of its presence or power. The SD455 continued, rarer and more precious with each passing month, as if the world was already understanding that it was witnessing the end of something. Behind the wheel, a ride back to 1973. Slide into the driver's seat. Your hands find the steering wheel, thick, honest, real. Close the door, and the outside world becomes muffled, distant. You're in a bubble of purpose now. Turn the key again. The starter engages, and there's that moment of silence before the engine catches, that half second where the car is deciding whether to wake up. Then, ignition. The V8 catches with a sound that belongs to no other era, no other nation, no other moment in history except this one. It's not a refined sound. It's not polite. It's raw and honest and powerful, like hearing a lion roar from inside a garage. The shaker hood vibrates. You can feel it through the steering wheel, through the seat, through your bones. The idle settles into a rhythm, that deep chunking rumble of 8 cylinders working together in perfect harmony. The smell washes through the cabin, that unmistakable scent of leaded gasoline being burned just hot enough to leave a trace of richness in the air, mixed with hot engine oil, and the smell of rubber being pressed into asphalt by half a ton of machine ready to move. Release the parking brake. The hydraulic system hisses slightly, a whisper of pressure being relieved. Press your foot gently on the throttle. Just a kiss, just a suggestion, and the engine responds immediately. There's no lag. There's no hesitation. There's just pure, immediate power, like the car is reading your mind and responding before your thoughts are even fully formed. Pull onto the empty road. The sun is still hanging low on the horizon, and the asphalt is warm from the day's heat. Press the accelerator a bit more. The car responds like it's been waiting its entire life for this moment. The rear tires grip the asphalt with a sound like fabric tearing. The front end lightens slightly, feeling like the car might just float away into the sky. But it doesn't. That heavy-duty suspension keeps it glued to the road, holding the power down, channeling it into forward motion. The shaker hood vibrates in rhythm with your accelerations, a constant reminder that 500 pound-feet of torque is sitting 6 inches in front of your eyes, burning leaded fuel and pushing the limits of what cast iron and American engineering can accomplish. The engine roars. That's not a metaphor. It actually roars. The sound builds and builds, a crescendo of combustion and horsepower, and you feel your entire body being pressed backward into the seat, not violently, not unsafely, but with the kind of solid, undeniable presence that tells you something true. You are in control of significant power. You are driving something that was built with intention. You are part of an era that understood cars differently than we understand them now. The speedometer climbs, 60, 70. The road is smooth, and the Trans Am suspension soaks up the imperfections like it was designed for this exact purpose. The shaker hood is vibrating constantly now, a percussion instrument keeping time with the engine's rhythm. The smell of hot rubber and gasoline fills the cabin. Your hands know exactly what they're doing on the steering wheel. This is muscle memory. This is instinct. This is what driving was supposed to feel like before cars became about efficiency and computers and sensor networks measuring every breath the engine took. Press the throttle harder, the transmission downshifts with a solid thunk. The engine rev counter jumps, the car accelerates again, the tires gripping, the power channeling through the rear end and into the asphalt. The whole world narrows down to the road ahead, the sound of the engine, the feeling of power underneath you, and the understanding that you are driving something that shouldn't exist, something that was built in defiance of an era, something that represents the last gasp of a philosophy that believed cars should be exciting, that engineering should be about passion as much as pragmatism. This is what it felt like in 1973. This is what the SD4555 meant, not transportation, not economics, power and freedom, and the refusal to accept that the world had to change just because that's what the regulations said it should do. Rarity, legacy, and the end of an era. The numbers tell a story of scarcity that's almost hard to believe. In 1973, when the SD455 first arrived in the Trans Am, Pontiac built approximately 252 examples, not 252,000, not 25,200, 250. That's it. Some sources debate the exact number, but everyone agrees it was somewhere in that neighborhood. A rounding error in the history of American automotive production, a whisper where there should have been a roar. By 1974, as the world continued to tighten regulations and insurance companies continued to make performance cars economically impossible to own, Pontiac built approximately 943 Trans Ams with the SD455, still a pittance, still barely a footnote in the production history of General Motors, but 943 more chances for the engine that shouldn't have existed to find its way into the hands of drivers who understood what they had. That's roughly 1,095 SD455 Trans Ams total, somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 cars built across 2 model years. That's fewer than were produced in a single week of many mainstream sedan production. That's rarer than most exotic sports cars. That's a ghost. That's a memory. That's a legend. And how many have survived? Fewer than you'd want to believe. The 1970s were rough on cars. Rust attacked from underneath. Engines wore out. Transmissions failed. Insurance companies priced them into junkyards. Kids crashed them on Saturday nights. Casual owners traded them in when they needed a practical car for a growing family. The road was not kind to the muscle cars of that era, and the laws of thermodynamics and entropy took their toll on every single one that wasn't carefully preserved. The surviving SD455 Trans Ams have become holy grail machines in the collector world. They're not just cars, they're artifacts. They're monuments to an era when Pontiac believed that performance was worth fighting for, when engineers would stand up to corporate management and argue passionately for the right to build something exciting, when the philosophy was that cars should be thrilling experiences wrapped in steel and paint. A good SD455 Trans Am today, the kind that's been preserved or properly restored, is worth serious money. Not just money, but respect. The kind of respect that comes from understanding that you're looking at something that was built against the odds, that shouldn't have existed, but did exist. Because a group of engineers decided that the world needed one more great American muscle engine before the era ended forever. What the SD455 means today. Sit in that car now, 50 years later, and something magical happens. The world falls away. The modern regulations, the modern computer systems, the modern idea that cars should be efficient and connected and intelligent, all of it fades. What remains is something pure and honest and true. The SD455 represents defiance in a time when defiance cost something. Building that engine in 1973 and 1974 wasn't profitable. It wasn't what the market wanted. It wasn't what the regulations encouraged. It was what the engineers wanted to build. It was what Pontiac believed Americans deserved, even if America was trying to tell itself that it didn't deserve things like that anymore. For people who remember the 1970s, who remember leaded gasoline and CB radios and the feeling of absolute freedom on a summer night highway, who remember their dads or their uncles working on cars in the driveway, tuning carburetors, adjusting timing, checking oil, who remember hearing a big block engine roaring down the street and feeling something shift inside their chest. The SD455 Trans Am is more than a car. It's a time machine. It's a living memory. It's proof that the era actually happened, that the feeling was real, that American engineering and American passion could combine into something this pure. Many of those who were young when the Trans Am ruled the streets have become the preservationists and collectors and caretakers of these machines today. They're not just protecting cars, they're protecting a piece of their own history. They're keeping alive the sound of their own youth. They're ensuring that a few people every year can close their eyes, get behind the wheel of an SD455, press the throttle, and feel exactly what it felt like to be alive in that particular moment in American history. The Trans Am became a symbol. It appeared on posters that hung on garage walls next to dreams and aspirations. It showed up in movies and television shows that understood that some cars transcended the category of transportation and became expressions of individual freedom. The screaming chicken represented independence. The shaker hood represented honesty. You could see the engine working. You could feel it moving. The whole package represented a refusal to accept that the modern world had to be boring, safe, and carefully regulated into submission. Closing. What remains when the sun goes down? Imagine parking that SD455 back in the garage where we started, watching the sun finish its descent beyond the horizon. The engine ticks as it cools, that metallic clicking sound that only big block V8s make, the sound of heat dissipating from cast iron and steel. The whole car settles slightly, the suspension relaxing now that the power is being held in abeyance. Flip off the lights. In the darkness, the car is just a silhouette, a shape that holds 50 years of history and engineering and passion. Walk around it slowly, run your hand along the hood, feel the heat still radiating from underneath. That's where the miracle lived. That's where engineers fought corporate bureaucrats and won. That's where hand assembly met American muscle. That's where one last great engine was born before the rules changed forever. Pull the garage door closed. The sound echoes in the space behind it. The 1973 and 1974 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am SD455 is not just a car, it's the sound of an era closing. It's the last sentence in a paragraph about American automotive passion that will never quite be written the same way again. It's a machine that was built in defiance of the future and somehow won, at least for 2 years, at least for about 200 lucky owners who understood exactly what they had. Every time one of these cars fires up, every time that massive V8 catches and the shaker hood vibrates and the screaming chicken spreads its wings one more time, history is being made. Not new history, old history, the most important kind. The kind that reminds us who we were, where we came from, and what it felt like when engineering was about passion as much as practicality. That engine rumbling down the street is not just noise, it's memory. It's freedom. It's the sound of defiance winning, at least for now, at least for one more run down one more empty road somewhere in America, under stars that have watched this story unfold and will continue watching long after the last SD455 eventually falls silent. That's what remains. That's what matters. That's the legacy of a car that shouldn't have existed, but did, and in doing so, became immortal.